right, thank you, everyone. We're now going to reconvene to open session, and we'll begin with the flag salute. And I understand we have someone from Del Val to lead us in the flag salute.
Hello. All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, our next item is to report out actions from closed session. In closed session, the board voted 5-0 to release a temporary certificated employee as of March 7, 2014. This is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Board of Education for the Livermore Valley Joint Unified School District. Our primary focus is the education of students of the school district. During this meeting, members of the public will have the opportunity to share information and voice their ideas and concerns about matters within the jurisdiction of this public agency. During the board's discussion of each agenda item, there will be time for you to have the opportunity to speak to that item. If the topic you want to address is not on the agenda, although it's not mandatory, we ask you to fill out a tan speaker card, and you will be called to speak on the topic during communications from the public. If you wish to address the board on a topic that is on the agenda, we ask you to use a blue speaker card. And again, it is not mandatory to do so, but I will call your name in no particular order to speak to the board for no more than 3 minutes, unless otherwise noted. Our meetings are televised on cable channel 28, Wednesdays at 7 p.m. and Saturdays at 9 a.m. for those of you who aren't watching cartoons or sleeping. So, Mrs. Bowers, I understand we have a change to the agenda tonight.
Thank you, Madam President. We actually have 2 changes to the agenda. The first one is a very minor change. On the agenda description itself, item Roman numeral 3A, there was a typographical error. Del Valley High School should read Del Val High School. So there's a corrected version of the agenda at your tabletop for your reference. And then we would like to honor the request of our teachers bargaining unit, LEA, so that the representatives here do not have to stay so late because they are interested in some particular items. We'd like to move info discussion items C and D to earlier in the agenda preceding A and B. Thank you.
All right, we'll take them in that order. Now we move to communication from the public. Communication from the public is a time for the public to comment either in writing or verbally on any item that is not on the agenda. The board may listen to the comment and ask staff clarifying questions, but they will neither discuss nor take action in this meeting on items that are not on the agenda in accordance with the Brown Act. If you would like to address a topic that is not on this evening's agenda, now is the time to do so. Did anyone turn in a card? Nope. Okay, Mr. Rogie, is there any correspondence? Thank you. And with that, we're on to recognitions.
Thank you. So we'll start with the most pleasant part of every meeting, I believe. If you can see, though, everyone's on this side. I'm not sure what's going on here, but anyway, it just looks interesting. I just had to comment on that. But this is the most pleasant part of the meeting, and that is our recognitions of either staff or hardworking community members and students. And so it's my pleasure to introduce Principal Mr. Daryl Avila, the principal of Del Val High School, or Del Valle High School, and he's going to do the honors of a very special introduction of a wonderful group of students and staff members who support them.
Good evening, President Runyon, members of the board, Superintendent Bowers, and of course her cabinet, along with ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank you for giving us this opportunity to recognize what I consider an outstanding group from Del Val High School. Last April, Director of Campus Catering Barbara Lee, culinary instructor Diane Russell, and myself made a presentation to the board about a concept that we wanted to see implemented at Del Val High School. And of course, with your support and the support of Superintendent Bowers, at the start of the 2013-14 school year, we put together our inaugural class of the Del Val Culinary Academy. Under the guidance of our instructor, Diane Russell, our academy has provided a rich learning environment for our students. Along the way, our students have not only learned culinary skills, but they've also learned those 21st century skills that we know are very important: communication, collaboration, creativity, critical thinking, as well as being able to present themselves as good citizens and young people of great character. Some of our successes include every student in the program has passed their ServSafe license, so they all have earned their food handler's license, passing that test. The Academy has helped in a lot of different functions, not only with the district but in the city. They are part of the district kickoff, making up cookie and cracker and cheese trays along with fruit trays. At the Del Val annual Thanksgiving feast, they prepared all the side dishes and the desserts. They worked the annual Rotary Crab Feed in the kitchen. One of the big things is they prepared over 873 cookies during the holiday season that were sold, and along our lines of wanting to try to be self-sufficient, the money that they earned will go toward chef jackets. So right now we have the jackets in and we're getting them embroidered, and probably within the next week or so we'll proudly wear those chef jackets as we go through our learning. Trustee White also gave us the opportunity to present ourselves to the Economic Development and Education Task Force of the Chamber of Commerce. And not only did a group of our students present the Culinary Academy, but they also presented, I believe, some very delicious scones for the group to sample. This academy, I believe, follows the district mission of graduating students with all the skills necessary to contribute and thrive in a changing world. And because of that, I'm proud to present members of the Del Val Culinary Academy. As I read their names, our instructor, Diane Russell, will present them with a certificate, and I know we'll have you, ladies and gentlemen, walk around and shake hands with the cabinet and the board members. So first off, with us, joining us tonight, Matt Franco. Perla Garcia. Danielle Lewis. Stephen Lopez. Devin Maldonado. And of course, Diane Russell, who I believe is the best culinary instructor going, bar none. Thank you, everyone. So, guys, why don't you lead the way, Steve?
And I think we have another recognition of the Math Counts volunteers and student participants. Would you like to introduce the item?
Certainly. Thank you, President Runyon. So tonight we have with us Mrs. Amy Robbins. She's our Director of Curriculum and Special Projects, and one of the most special projects is the competition with our Math Counts, and we host a district and citywide competition every year. And so tonight we're here to recognize some of the participants, award winners, and coordinators who made it happen.
Good evening, Superintendent Bowers, board members. Tonight I would like to present to a group of students, teachers, and volunteers that have worked diligently to support math and the challenge of math at the middle school level with the Math Counts competition. So as a former math teacher and a middle school principal, this program is near and dear to me. I remember the days of going into a geometry class and jumping up and down and encouraging strongly students to participate in the competition because it is such a valuable experience for students. So first I would like to bring forward Robin Schlichter, the teacher on special assignment, who is also our math coach in our district. And Robin coordinated the event this year and has for several years. And so I'm going to let her tell you more about the program and some of our participants.
Good evening. Math Counts is a nationwide organization that promotes mathematics achievement through a series of fun and challenging problems for middle schoolers. Our middle schools each have a Math Counts club that meets weekly to engage students in collaborative problem solving. Community and parent volunteers partner with math teachers to offer this program to our students. The 2014 annual Math Counts competition was held on Saturday, January 11th at the Granada High School Student Union. This event is a way for all Livermore middle schoolers to compete in mathematics. It is open to all middle school students in Livermore. This year we had 102 students, which I believe is the highest in recent years. Of the 102 students, 77 students were from the Livermore Valley Joint Unified School District, attending our 5 middle school and K-8 schools. There were 46 students from Mendenhall, 15 students from Christensen, 10 students from East Avenue. From Junction K-8 school, we had 3 students compete. And for the first time, we had students compete from Joe Mitchell K-8 school. It was so exciting to see the enthusiasm from the 3 Joe Mitchell students. We will continue to grow the program at this school. We are very grateful for the teachers, administrators, parents, and volunteers who make Math Counts possible. I would like to acknowledge the Math Counts coaches from each site. From East Avenue Middle School, Jim and Louise Morris. From Christensen Middle School, Dr. Bill Dunlop. From Junction Avenue K-8 school, James Cable. From Mendenhall Middle School, Dr. Ted Perry, Kathy Perry, Ted Lawrence, Mai Cole, Eric Anderson, Sue Ackerman, Tanya Everett, David Morgan, Joe Johnson, John Scholholtz, Stephen Hahn, Kay Savory, and Bruce Hugger. Many of our middle school math teachers provide support for the Math Counts program by promoting student participation, offering their classrooms on a weekly basis, volunteering weekly, and coming to the Saturday event. The annual competition would not be possible without the teacher volunteers. This year, we had many teachers come and help score student work and do the data entry that is required for individual and team scores. I would like to thank the following teachers for their time and dedication to the Math Counts program: Matt Thomas, Janine Bloss, Leslie Stevens, Patty Blackburn, Eric Lee, and Stephen Yu. Of course, all of this hard work and dedication is for our Livermore students. I would like to recognize the students who placed on a team and or as individuals. From Christensen Middle School, and students, when you hear your name, you can come up and we'll give you a certificate. Avni Vakani, Chris Johnson, Radha Sridharan, sorry. From East Avenue Middle School, Kendall Hornbeck, Kyle Lamb, Paul Chirika, and Richard Jing. And from Mendenhall Middle School, Abby Roth, Andrew DeVita, Ashley Zwang, Houston Trin, Megan McLean, Paula Lee, Shannon Yan, Skylar Shapiro, Tegan Borg, Timothy Blanton, Weston Everett, Zachary Miller, and Mikanesh Singhai.
So I personally would like to thank all of the students who participated, many of whom were unable to attend tonight, the teachers who volunteered their time before and after school to host this wonderful opportunity, the weekly difficult math problems, that problem solving that's occurring in their rooms, the coaches, and I would like to also thank Robin Slichter for coordinating the entire event. And she has on the t-shirt to display the t-shirt that the students received. Unfortunately, there was such high demand that there weren't any left for us adults. So we'll let Robin wear it and smile. So thank you all for your participation and problem solving. We appreciate all your hard
Now,
work.
before you come up and shake all our hands, I want you to go and stand behind the podium and look up here at this camera and tell all your friends to watch for you on TV. So come stand behind the podium and look this way so everyone can see you. And say, "Go Math." All right, now, please. And for those of you who didn't clue in, one of those coaches was one of the board members here. So we are really lucky to have Dr. Dunlop available and willing to do that. So now we're at student board member reports, and have you decided between you who'd like to go first? All right.
Good evening, Superintendent Bowers, President Runyon, and fellow Board of Trustees. At Livermore High School, we are heading towards the end of the trimester, but still going strong. For sports news, wrestling last Saturday competed in the Division II NCS Championship. The Cowboys dominated the competition, beating Mount Diablo 75-6, Alhambra 55-22, and Las Lomas 43-27. We had many 3-0 leaders. So we're really proud of them being NCS Division II champions, and they brought home the flag and everything, and they're really proud. We're going into our last week of basketball and have a game tonight against De La Salle, and our girls are playing Carondelet. And Friday we'll have our basketball game against Granada, along with on Thursday our girls basketball playing Granada. And on Friday we'll have a lot of senior night acknowledgments and some of our winter sports players, including basketball, cheerleading, dance, and shooting stars, will be acknowledged. Today, golf is playing Albany away, and baseball is playing Bellarmine away. So for clubs, this week it's FFA, or National FFA Week, and our FFA club is celebrating all of their significance and the things that they've done to help our community. And they're helping spread some fun facts about agriculture and what they do here as a club on campus. This week we have our A through G freshman registration at school tonight and throughout the other days of the week. So tonight is A through G for last names, and it'll continue to go on. So we're really excited to meet the new members of our Cowboy Nation and can't wait to get them on track for a prosperous future. Our expo that was about 2 weeks ago, but after we were here last, was better than ever and way larger than last year. We really think it educated and encouraged current and potential students what Livermore High School is about and how they can be a part of it. For ASB news, in light of our game against Granada this week, we're having a Spirit Week. Today was Wild Wild West Day. Tomorrow is Diva Day. Thursday is Green and Gold. And Friday is Neon Day for the rally, but back in green and gold for the game. And last week for Valentine's Day, Cowboy Nation had a kissing booth where students, if they were dressed in pink, they received Hershey kisses. And students continued to wear pink to the basketball games to share the love for the basketball team. So for now, that's all that's going on at Livermore High School. Thank you.
Good evening, Superintendent Bowers, President Runyon, and Board Trustees. We're now in our 10th week of Trimester 2 at Granada. So in the world of sports, our girls soccer team qualified for NCS as the 9th seed, and they're going to play their first NCS game tomorrow at 7 o'clock at Oakley High School, so we're wishing them luck. And our E-Ball Wrestling Championships will be held at Granada High this Saturday as well. Boys basketball, cheerleading, and dance are having their senior nights tonight against Monta Vista, so we're really excited for them and hope their senior nights are great. And also, as Sarah had said, our basketball teams will be playing each other this week, with the girls playing on Thursday and the boys playing on Friday, so we're excited to see the outcome of those games. And we're also getting ready for spring sports. This week is wrapping up our tryouts for those sports. In the world of academics, our college planning night is being held tonight from 6:30 to 8:30 in the 300 Hall, and it's to give students really of all grade levels, as well as their parents, a better understanding of the application process, because it can be a little bit daunting. So let's help them get an idea of the tests they need to take and also applications for financial aid that will make the college process a lot easier to pay for. Our grad night committee is also going to be hosting a Catalyst SAT boot camp March 1st and March 2nd, and it's going to be held from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. both days at Granada. More details as well as how to sign up can be found on the Granada High website. There's a link and there's a flyer if you're interested. And upcoming events, ASB and class elections are going to be held very soon. Our ASB elections will be held from the 25th of February to the 4th of March, and our class elections will be held from the 18th of March to the 25th of March. So we encourage all Granada students to become informed about the process and to apply if they're interested in making a difference at the school in the next year. We're also still planning our 50th anniversary celebration for Granada, and we encourage everyone to mark their calendars for Memorial Day weekend and to plan on coming out to celebrate 50 years of excellence with us. For more information on the celebration and how to get involved, you can visit our website again, and there's going to be a link. In leadership, on February 7th, our class and ASB officers, as well as leadership students, attended TVLC at Cal High. It was a really great event, and a lot of students walked away with really great ideas for fundraisers and community service opportunities to bring back to school so that our students can make our leadership class even better and to improve the environment for all students at Granada. Our Community Outreach School-Wide Committee put together a really great Valentine's Day surprise this past Friday. It was a lot of fun. They made a heart for every single student on campus, so that's 2,000 hearts, and they strung them around campus so that as students walked around on Valentine's Day, they could find their name and rip off their heart and bring it home with them. And all the students really enjoyed it, and it made them feel really excited to be a part of such a huge community that was so caring and loving. And the staff got a lot of love too. They were given goodie bags in their boxes put together by the committee. So it was a really great Valentine's Day, and we were excited to bring a little bit of love to Granada. Our International Outreach Committee has been working tirelessly to build a water well in Ghana, and they recently just held a fundraiser at Pachi's Pizza. So everyone who went to dinner at Pachi's that night, 20% of their bill went back to our efforts for the water well. So they raised nearly $300, so bringing them even closer to their goal of completing the water well this year. So we're really excited for them. And the class of 2016 put on a really awesome Mardi Gras themed winter ball the weekend before this last one. So they sold over 600 tickets, and it was a really great event. There was lots of fun. There was a pre-party, and everyone who went really enjoyed themselves and got really into the theme, so we were excited to see that go off so well for the class of 2016. This week, we're also having a Spirit Week in honor of the game Friday. So today was Superhero Day, tomorrow will be Twin Day, Thursday is Hitting the Gym Day, and Friday, of course, is Black and Gold Day. And also, to cap off our week, we're going to have a Winter Sports Rally Friday to celebrate all the sports that went on over this trimester and to celebrate the achievements of our student athletes, as well as to pump us up for the game that night. In clubs, the Red Cross Club sold Valentine's grams last week for a club fundraiser and to spread a little Valentine's cheer around Granada. They're also going to be really instrumental in helping with the blood drive for Delaney Newton, which is coming up in March. And they're also going to be putting on a to-pay event. So that's to educate students about the usage of tobacco and all the risks and dangers that come along with it, and also to help educate them about prevention programs so they don't become involved in tobacco use. DECA also participated in a state conference February 6th to 9th, which was held in Anaheim. It was a really competitive conference, and we were very proud of how well our DECA students represented Granada, like they do every day. So we're really proud of them. And also, in case you guys weren't aware, they have this thing on campus called Cafe LA, and it's a student-run cafe and store, and they sell just breakfast foods and snacks in between passing periods, water, drinks, everything along those lines. And it's a really great program for our campus because it not only teaches them business skills, but it helps them pay for their conferences that they attend. So through the proceeds they make, they pay for themselves to attend these conferences, which is really cool. So it's kind of self-sustained, and we're really proud of them for all of their hard work. That's all that's going on at Granada.
Well, that sounds like a lot. Now we've come to time for our employee associations, and I see Ms. Fields.
Good evening, President Runyon, Superintendent Bowers, members of the board. It is my pleasure as the president of Livermore Education Association to address you tonight. And there's a couple really cool things happening right now. If there's anybody watching or if this is live, Buffalo Wild Wings, we have coaches competing, Livermore and Granada, trying to raise money for our sports. So for those of us in the audience here, it goes until 10 o'clock if you want to help put some money into some wings and into our sports. Jenny and I had the opportunity of attending the new Teacher Center Symposium this last week in Burlingame. And I have to tell you that we got some tremendous training, and I see why our TV tip teachers are so incredible as far as coaches. This is where they've gotten a lot of their training and a lot of the things that they share with us in our professional development. It is a wonderful organization. We were able to take sessions on blended learning, instructional coaching, and we went more in depth on the Common Core. Speaking of Common Core, today we got to have a wonderful training that deepened our understanding of how to navigate the district's Common Core materials and resources on our website. We had Ravi Pravala, who's our new technology specialist, teacher on special assignment, and we had Debbie Burkle lead a group of teachers who are going to act as tech mentors and leaders at their site to help roll out some of our work that comes up on the 26th. We were able to learn about Google Drive and how to share documents while we're working with them. It was really exciting and really worthwhile. The teachers were diving right into it. Tomorrow I'll be judging for my 4th year, I believe, History Day projects at Mendenhall Middle School. And if you haven't been able to get over there, tomorrow the projects will be all over the library. There will be exhibits, performances, documentaries, and websites, all student-made. And so this year I'll be judging websites for the first time. And I do want to say a very special thank you on behalf of LEA to our board members, Tom McLaughlin and Ann White, and Mr. Bill Dunlop for joining us at our school board breakfast. And special thanks to Bill because not only did he make it there before he had to go to Super Science Saturday, but it was a nice surprise. We weren't expecting him. So we had 3 out of our 5, and next year maybe we'll have 5 out of 5. And last but not least, I also participated in the training for our coordinated bargaining with other local associations from Contra Costa County and Alameda counties on LCFF. So we are moving forward and deepening our knowledge on the things that will help us do a better job. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that brings us to our information discussion items. And as we discussed, we're going to start with item C, the public hearing for the Livermore Education Association. Would you like to?
Thank you. So I'll ask Mr. Chris Van Schack, our Assistant Superintendent of Administrative Services, to do the honors of the introduction of this item.
Thank you, Ms. Bowers. In what has become a familiar process, I know, tonight I'm going to discuss contract negotiations, and we open them tonight with our Livermore Education Association. As you recall, the negotiations process involves the sunshining of articles, which is merely an opportunity for the public to see those things that the district and the employee association intend to negotiate, and they have an opportunity to comment if they like to. Our process here in Livermore is to leave that open for 2 weeks, and then the next meeting you guys would go ahead and approve of the district items and accept the union items. So tonight I'm here to present LEA's initial proposal. Our chief negotiator for LEA is in the crowd if you have any questions, but they have 10 items they would like to open and discuss, and you see those listed before you. Included in them is workday evaluation, our PAR program, class sizes, wages, health benefits, retiree health benefit trust, calendars, extracurricular pay, and pay schedule. And those are the items that they are bringing forward. I'm going to ask President Runyon to open a public hearing and accept public comments if there are any. And that would be through step one.
All right, so I'm going to open the public hearing. Is there a member of the public that would like to comment? Okay, since we have no one coming forward, I'm going to go ahead and ask, are there comments from the board? And I'm going to close the public hearing. And that brings us to item D, the public hearing for, well, tell us.
Part two, which is the district proposal. Again, the same process is in place. This is the evening when we indicate to the public and to the board those items that the district would like to negotiate. Listed in front of you are those items. There are 11 of them, and many of those you'll notice are the same as the ones that the Livermore Education Association wanted to negotiate. And so we're looking forward to good, cordial conversations this year and good progress. And so once again, I will ask the board to, once again, this isn't an approval tonight, it's just an acceptance and an opportunity for the public to comment. And so I will ask President Runyon once again.
Going to go ahead and open the public hearing. Is there a member of the public that would like to comment on this item? Now's your chance. Members of the board? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing, and we're going to go on with item A, the community survey results. And Madam Superintendent?
So thank you, Madam President. As you know, we've begun exploring the possibility of pursuing an extension of the current local parcel tax measure to preserve vital programs and services for students. Part of the exploration process includes surveying members of the community to determine the level of support. And now that polling is complete, this evening we have representatives from Traumatola Advisors and True North Research who are going to present to the board and provide an analysis of the results to determine the feasibility and the level of support for extending Measure N. I'm going to start with a little bit of background.
Is that clear? Go ahead. Did you want to start first? No, you go. Okay.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam President, members of the board. I'm Dr. Tim McClarney. I am the president of True North Research, and we are a research firm that specializes in working with California school districts as well as other public agencies around the state in using surveys to develop a statistically reliable understanding of the communities that they serve. With me is Larry Traumatola, and I'm sure Larry will have some words on the results of the survey as I go through this presentation. My business partner and I, together as a two-person team, have designed and conducted over 800 research studies for public agencies, and about 300 of those are what we call revenue measure or tax measure feasibility studies, where the goal is to understand if it's feasible to move forward with a revenue measure. And if it is feasible, how you go about structuring that measure in a way that it's consistent with what your community is wanting to support in a particular measure. To date, we've raised about $22 billion at the local level, and since the start of the recession in 2008, we've actually, which is, as you might imagine, become a more difficult time and environment in which to pass tax measures around the state. We've had a 93% success rate combined for school bonds and parcel taxes around the state. And the reason I mention that is because as I go through tonight's presentation, I may make reference to how the results that we're seeing here in Livermore Valley compare to what we typically see when we do this type of work for other school districts, and I wanted you to have a sense for my experience in the context of my references. Also, as I go through tonight's presentation, I welcome questions from the board as I go, or at the end, whichever is your preference. Okay.
Well, I'm going to start with a little bit of parcel tax measure background and what's unique to Livermore before we jump into what might be in the future. So in November of 2004, recall many of us were here, 71.6% of Livermore voters approved Measure D. So it's $120 per parcel tax measure. It was for 5 years. There was a senior exemption and an oversight committee, averaged about to $10 per month. And that went through June 2010. And that kept some vital programs and services going here in Livermore, even while there was uncertainty sometimes with the state support for economics for schools. And then in November 2008, we actually went out to renew that with a slight increase, and 76.2% of the voters approved Measure M. And that was about $138 per parcel, not about, it was exactly $138 per parcel for the 5 years again with a senior exemption and Citizens Oversight Committee. So about $11.50 per month. And that is slated to expire next June 2015, so a year from this June. And some of the vital programs and services that really came to the forefront as priorities for this community were smaller class sizes, high school counselors, middle school electives, elementary science specialists, and technology. So these were all things that our local community valued, and they felt that by giving and supporting the local district and providing those things, that we could preserve vital programs, again, even while the state had fluctuated with its funding. And so that kind of takes us to where we are now, which is the exploration phase and the current parcel tax measure. So just, I think there's a visual as well that would go. This is actually a breakdown of how the funds were spent last year. So you can see that all schools ended up benefiting, all students as they go through the system ended up benefiting. And then there's a visual for those of us who like to look at things differently. There's a pie graph in the next chart. Another way to look at it, the proportions. So we'll go ahead.
Okay. Okay, yeah. I'm not going to be able to do that from here.
The parcel tax helps fund technology so that we can switch the buttons and make.
What's that?
So while we're waiting for the transition, I just want to tell you that we did receive notice from some of our math count students who could not come tonight to get their second recognition. Notice they had real recognition the first time. And it's because they were studying math. I think there was a larger competition coming up. So that was very exciting news.
All right, thank you. And so I have about a 12, maybe about a 15 slide presentation here where we're going to go over the highlights of the survey results. And again, I welcome questions as I go or at the end, whichever is your preference. Before I talk about the actual results of the study, it's probably helpful to review for a moment both the purpose of the study, or the why, as well as the methodology for how we went about doing the study. In terms of the purpose, I mentioned at the outset this is what we call a tax measure feasibility study. It's really designed to do three things. The first is to answer that question of, is it feasible? And by feasible, I mean if the board were to choose to place a measure on an upcoming ballot, does it have a reasonable chance of success? You might imagine the answer to that question isn't always yes. Sometimes we look at these results, and especially when you're talking about 2/3 measures, we look at the data and there's really no way to get you from where you are today to where you need to be successful on election day in a near term. And when that's the case, we're very frank about that. And the last thing the board wants or staff wants or we want, frankly, is for you to move forward with a measure that really doesn't have a reasonable chance of success. Fortunately, when it comes to schools, voters tend to place schools towards the top of their priority list in a lot of ways. And so when there is feasibility, the next purpose of this survey is to help us understand how would you go about packaging that measure in a way it's consistent with what your community wants to support. There's a lot of things that go into the package. There's obviously the price tag, how much do they view as affordable? What is it you'd be spending the money on, right, in terms of the actual, if it were successful, how are you going to actually propose to spend the money, accountabilities that can be put into these measures, et cetera. And so that's another goal of this study, is to understand, if we're going to structure a measure in a renewal, what is it that our community is most interested in funding? And then finally, to gather information needed for communications and outreach. And I'm a big believer in, if you're an agency that's going to choose to place a measure on a ballot, it's also incumbent upon you to help educate the community about the choice that you're asking them to make. And so this survey provides some guidance in terms of what information your community needs to have in order to feel like they're well educated about the decision that is going to be put before them. In terms of methodology, this was a telephone survey, averaged about 16 minutes in length for an interview, and conducted in January this year. We spoke with 350 voters selected at random from what we call the likely June 2014 universe. What that group is voters who are not only registered to vote, but based on their voting history and their demographics, we would expect would actually cast a ballot in the primary election coming this June. That's a relatively small percentage of your total electorate. You have about 50,000 voters. About 21,000 of those voters are likely to cast a ballot in June. And so that was the sampling universe from which we drew our 350. Now, because this was a random sample and not a census of all of those 21,000 likely June voters, it has what's known as a margin of error due to sampling, and that's about plus or minus 5.2%. What this means is we can be 95% confident that the results we'll talk about tonight are within 5% of what we would have found had we spoken with all of your likely June voters. So it has about a 5% wiggle room around the results that we'll talk about tonight. Okay, on to the actual results. This first slide is what we call our importance of issues slide, and it's the first real substantive question of the survey. And for each of those issues shown on the left side of that figure, we simply ask people to tell us how important it is to them. Is it extremely important or very important, somewhat important, or not at all important? And we've ranked them here from high to low based on the combined percentage who said it's either extremely important or very important. We asked this question early on both because it's a good warm-up question. It gets people thinking about local issues. And it's also an opportunity for us to identify how education-related issues stack up against other issues in the community, in particular how they stack up against other issues that compete for tax dollars, as well as that issue of preventing local tax increases. And it's kind of a rough rule of thumb, but it makes sense, and that is if education-related issues stack up at the top of this list, right? They outpace the other issues that also compete for tax dollars, and there's a sizable gap in the perceived importance between education and this issue of preventing local tax increases. It bodes well for the feasibility of a measure. Why? Because they care a lot about what it is you're proposing to fund, and they care more about that than that issue of keeping their taxes low. And this is exactly the pattern that you see here tonight. Top of the list, most important issue, maintain the quality of education in local schools. You had 86% of your voters say that that's either extremely or very important to them. Second on the list there was maintaining local property values, which obviously there is a nexus between good schools and good property values. Then maintaining local streets and roads, improving public safety, on down the list. You get second from the bottom there is that issue of preventing local tax increases at 57%. So there's about a 29% gap in the perceived importance between maintaining the quality of education in local schools and preventing local tax increases. If I knew nothing else about the rest of your results, and this is always the first question I look at when we do these polling, it's amazing how well I can look at this question and say, okay, we're going to have feasibility, because this correlates really strongly when you have this kind of pattern with an electorate that's then going to go on and say, okay, I'm willing to consider some sort of a tax measure to fund schools. Now, After the importance of issues question, we go right to what we call our initial ballot test. And the idea is before we get any deeper into this interview and we start talking in more detail about how Measure M funds have been spent or arguments pro and con as to why someone should or should not be supportive of this measure, we present respondents with a mock-up of that roughly 75-word ballot statement and we get their reaction. It's a really good gauge of where your community is at today on the natural with respect to a proposed parcel tax renewal. And as you can see there, the language is consistent with what you typically see on a ballot. In order to do the things that you see there in the bullets, shall the school district extend the expiring 138 school parcel tax without raising the tax rate. So the one thing we also are making clear in this ballot statement is that it's an extension of the existing 138 rate. It is not increasing it. And here are your results. Initial ballot test, you had 70% of your voters say that they would support the proposed parcel tax renewal. You had 22% who said they were opposed. You had 8% who said they were unsure. In the state of California, you need 2/3 or 66.667% in order to be successful. So right out of the gates at the initial ballot test, you're sitting about 3 points higher than that 2/3 threshold. That's a really good place to start. A lot of times when we work on these types of measures, you don't start at 2/3. You have to sort of climb hills to get to 2/3, right? You start below it and then you build support up to 2/3. So to be sitting at 70% on the initial ballot test is a really good place to be. And as you imagine, when you have 70% support, it's really widespread. There's actually only 2 groups when we look at subgroups by age or gender or partisanship, or do they have children in the district, how long they've lived in the district, all of those types of subgroups. There were only 2 that had support that was under 60%, and you had many groups that were supporting at 80+%. Now, one of the things you find when you do this type of research is that voters will base their opinion on a measure in part based on what's in the measure, so what's it funding and what the tax rate is, et cetera, which makes sense. But the other thing you find is that they will vote on this based in part about how they feel about you as an agency. And in a lot of ways, voters are kind of like a bank in that respect, right? They want to see that you're performing well with the funds that you have and providing a good, solid education with what you have before they're willing to.
Could I just ask you to hold for one second?
Sure.
The gentleman in the back who's taking the pictures, I have an extra copy of the slides if you'd like to. Can we pass that down? Go ahead.
Okay. And so we ask voters about what their perception is of the quality of education provided in the Livermore Valley Joint Unified School District. And as you can see here, you had about 64% who said either excellent or good. You had about 20% who said fair. You had less than 5% who said the quality of education is poor, very poor. And you only had 10% who didn't know. Sometimes in districts when we do this type of question, you'll have as many as 20 to 25% of voters who won't know enough about the school district to be able to venture an answer to this question. And so the good news is you don't have as many of those folks in that gray area as we would normally see. We also asked voters about sort of another background question and how they'd rate the school district's need for additional money. Would you say it has great need, moderate need, little need, or no need? We asked this question because that perception of need is obviously sort of a foundational perception for having a successful tax measure. If they look at you as a district and say you don't need money, then that naturally doesn't tend to correlate with them being supportive of a tax measure. And so we asked this question. You can see that 68% of your voters said that you have either a great or moderate need for funding, and that's actually on the higher side of what we've been seeing lately. Okay, sort of back to the measure. At this point, we transition to what we call our programs and projects section, and the idea here is really twofold. One is to start to educate this respondent more about what this measure would fund. Up to this point, they've only heard that 75-word ballot statement. We can only pack so many things into 75 words. And so here we get an opportunity to unpack this proposed parcel tax extension into all the types of services that it can fund and programs it can fund. And so in that way, we're starting to educate the respondent more about the measure. It's also an opportunity for us to understand, of all the things that you can fund with this, which of those do they view or they most favor you spending parcel tax proceeds on, and which of those are perhaps further down the list. One of the things that sort of jumps off this page is that everything we tested, right, had support from at least 75% of your voters. That's unusual. Usually when we ask this kind of a list, there's usually one or two programs or services at the bottom of the list that you may get 50% support for. Here you had 75% support for everything on the list or greater. The top three were continuing funding for advanced programs in math, science, engineering, and technology, so STEM, keeping schools safe and well maintained, attracting and retaining highly qualified teachers, and on down the list. What this says is if you choose to move forward with a renewal is you can pretty much bundle just about any combination of these services and programs into the measure, and they would be well received by your voters. Now, if the board chooses to place a measure on upcoming ballot, there's going to be an election cycle, and during that election cycle, you're going to have members of the community who are supportive of schools and supportive of this measure stand up and advocate on behalf of this measure to their neighbors and try and convince them to support it. You might also have some opponents who will stand up and try and convince their neighbors not to support this measure. So there's going to be a discussion and a debate and a dialogue that will happen during that election cycle. For this to be a reliable assessment of the community support for this proposed parcel tax renewal, we need to simulate that discussion and debate in the context of this interview so that we not only know where they're at today, which was that initial ballot test, but what happens to their support levels for your measure once they've been exposed to positive arguments as well as once they've heard negative arguments. And so on this slide we show the positive arguments that we tested, and the nature of the question is supporters of the measure say blank, you insert a positive argument. Do you think this is a very convincing, somewhat convincing, or not at all convincing reason to support the measure? All of the arguments we tested had at least 70% of your voters say it's at least a somewhat convincing reason to support the measure. The top three were whether or not you have school-aged children, protecting the quality of our schools, the quality of life in our community, and the value of our homes as a wise investment. Second one is if we want our kids to be prepared for success in college and 21st century careers, they need to have a high-quality education, including advanced courses in math, science, technology, and the arts. And then thirdly is this concept of local money. All the money raised by the measure will stay in the district to support our students. It cannot be taken away by the state or used for other purposes. So many of these positive arguments resonate. Now at this point in the interview, voters have heard a lot more now about this parcel tax than they did originally, right? They had the initial ballot test. Since then, we've talked about in detail the programs and projects that could be funded by it. We also tested these positive arguments. So we circle back and we ask them, now that you've heard a bit more, where do you stand on this measure? As you can see, support ticks up a little bit. At this point, you're sitting at 72% of your voters saying that they would support the measure. That's about 5% above that 2/3 threshold. Now, they haven't heard the negatives yet, and that's an important part of this as well. Again, for a realistic assessment of how feasible this measure is, we also tested a series of negative arguments. And one of the things you can see when you look at the negatives is they don't resonate quite as strong as the positives did. But the concepts that it's a sluggish economy, now's not a good time to be raising taxes, or that the district really needs to live within its means, and if they cut waste, they would not have to raise taxes, or we raise the that the passage of Prop 30 last November will pump billions of dollars into California schools. We don't need this tax. So we didn't pull any punches. We sort of anticipated some hard-hitting negative arguments, and we put them, bounced them off the respondents. But the real test is what happens afterwards, and that's your final ballot test. So on the heels of the negatives, support checks in at 71%. And so what you see actually over the course of this interview is a lot of stability in terms of your voter support for the proposed parcel tax renewal. Started out at 70%, went to 72%. Even after the negatives, it stayed at a little above that at 71%. All right, so what does all this mean? I've got a couple slides here that I'll comment on, and then I'll welcome questions again from the board. What does all this mean? Well, the first thing I will do is I'd circle back to that first question that I mentioned at the outset, which is why you do this study in the first place, which is to get a gauge of, is it feasible? If the board were to choose to place a parcel tax renewal measure on an upcoming ballot, does it have a reasonable chance of success? I think the answer to that is clearly yes. Many of the things that we want to see in place for a measure like this to be feasible are in place here. We found that voters perceived that maintaining the quality of education in local schools was the most important issue facing the community. That translated into strong natural support for your measure. Right out of the gates, we found 70% of your voters who said that they would be willing to support that $138 parcel tax renewal. All the things that we tested that you could fund with those parcel tax proceeds were popular in terms of the programs and services. The positive arguments resonated, and importantly, support remained above that 2/3 threshold throughout the poll at all of the ballot tests, even after the negatives, and that's an important thing. So again, lots of positive indicators in the poll that a measure like this is feasible. Now, having said that, it's important to recognize a couple of things about polls in general, but also about the process moving forward from here. The first thing I want to point out is that, and I always like to emphasize this when you have good positive poll results like you do here, and that is a poll is a snapshot in time, right? It's not a crystal ball looking ahead on election day and saying you're going to win at 70% on election day. It's a snapshot in time today. And the reason I mention that is because sometimes when we present very positive poll results like this, there can be a tendency for folks to go, and there's, okay, we've kind of got it in the bag, and they relax, right? Or they get lazy, and they don't do all the things they need to be doing between now and election day to be successful, and they lose. So the poll is a snapshot in time. What determines what happens on election day isn't what your poll is saying today. It's the decisions this board is going to make with respect to, if you choose to put a measure on the ballot, how you go about structuring that measure in a way that is well aligned with what your community's priorities are and what they want to support. It's certainly the amount of effort and investment that happens in outreaching to your community and helping them educating them about the decision you're going to be asking them to make, and communications, as well as events, some of which you can control and some of which you can't. And so it's always, as positive as your poll results are, it's always sort of an uphill climb to election day. And I just want to emphasize that because you have great results. It's certainly a place where you'd want to be to start this climb. But it's important that you do the things you need to do to be successful. And another issue that I would point out is we tested a no tax increase extension of $138, and that's a big part of why the support levels are as high as they are. I would recommend staying with that no tax increase extension scenario. I wouldn't decide to go for a tax increase on top of the 138 at this point for the parcel tax. You would see different poll results. They'd probably be 5 to even maybe 10% lower than this. And so although the numbers are really strong, those numbers do reflect the fact that it is a no tax increase extension. In terms of election timing, this was a likely June universe. I'd recommend going in June. These numbers are strong. And then finally, as I pointed out before, you really do need to continue that sort of two parts, the district's outreach and education to the public, which is a non-advocacy function. And then at a certain point, the independent campaign can stand up. It's not district funded, but to stand up and sort of carry that effort through to election day once this board chooses to actually votes to place the measure on the ballot. So with that, I know I've done a lot of talking. I'll be quiet for a moment and see if there's any questions from the board.
All right. So, fellow board members, Dr. Dunham.
One of my questions has to do with between now and June, there will be fluctuations. Do you come back and do additional polling to see where we are, or is that all our own job after that?
Given the aggressive timeline between now and June, I mean, sometimes what you're talking about is what's called a tracking poll, where we do a baseline poll now, and then before the board would vote to place a measure on the ballot, but after some of these communications have taken place, we would do a tracking poll to see, are we still in alignment? I'm going to not recommend that personally. I think you're close enough to this in terms of a schedule to the point that you can kind of just keep an eye on the community and engage in your communications exercise without having to come back and frankly put the expense in on a poll. I'd rather see you put that effort into communications instead. Tracking polls tend to be more important when there's a longer period of time between when we take our baseline poll. Like if this were going to be a November measure, let's say, at that point, you're not going to be, as a board, making a decision until August. And we just kind of keep an eye on how things are developing between now and August. And sometimes there is a need to do a tracking poll at that point. But with June, I think it's not necessary.
Okay, thank you.
In June, do you have any understanding or knowledge of what competing tax measures are going to be on that June? Pardon?
Alameda County.
Yeah, excuse me. I think there's only going to be one. There's going to be an Alameda County Measure AA, which is the half-cent sales tax. It is a no tax increase as well. It also requires 2/3. I think that's the only other competing tax measure on the ballot.
Isn't that one that, though, looking after 30 years instead of?
No, that's Measure BB, which will be in November.
Okay, good.
This is June, and it's Measure AA, and it's for the health care.
So the plus or minus deviation on this was what, 5%?
Yeah.
So the worst outcome could be 66.5. Given I mean, we've won. And it's still
If
at
the vote had
0.5.
taken place in January
Don't
and we
win.
would have lost, you have to have 66.7.
0.7, right.
And I can tell you that when we do bond measures and the threshold is 55%, right, it's often that will wind up with polling that will be comfortably outside that margin of error, right? So if they have 62% for a bond support and you need 55%, you have this comfort going in of knowing even if we're on the low side of our margin of error, we're still above the 55%. It's rare to have a parcel tax measure poll at 75, 78%, right, or anything like that. I mean, when you do polling for these types of measures, and Larry will test this, there's been plenty of times where we've moved forward with measures where the polling never even got to 66.67%. It got to 65%. I'm thinking like Moraga, right, is a good example of that, where it's on the bubble, right? To have 71 and 72%, it's not outside the margin of error, but you tend not to get much higher than that for 2/3 measures. So it's something to keep in mind, and it kind of underscores that statement I made at the end, which is, you know, you need to be careful about how you structure your measure. You need to invest in outreach into your community because it's not a slam dunk. They never are at 2/3.
And if I could add one thing that was a little different with us as opposed to some of our neighboring, or as compared to other folks who've gone out for similar measures, we didn't do any outreach or really public notice at all. It was just really a pulse check of where we are. The true test, I think, of what went into people's minds is the history of what we've done. But sometimes people, before they poll, will have already done some outreach, and then they do the little dipstick and poll. So this was with really nothing extraordinary by the district or any campaign folks or anything. It was almost a cold call.
Right.
Mrs. White?
Yes, I just would like to make a few historical comments here. The first was at 2004, was wildly successful. And I would suggest that part of the reason was we had not had an elementary science program the year before. So people missed it. And they knew the only way to restore it was to vote for this parcel tax. And it was a program. We didn't say hiring specialists. We talked about offering a program, which is, I think, significantly different wordsmithing. But you're the people who might really know. And we basically have had little district funding of counselors for 25 years. We've had some counselors hit or miss in the middle 90s because they wanted some school safety money. And we got safety money from the state, and so it was for counselors. And so we had a couple of counselors funded by them for a while. And maybe we've had one at each high school for a while, but not the almost adequate counseling staff that we have now. So it's really important that families know that. But I think the most important thing is in Livermore, class size is king. I mean, sometimes I visit with board members in other communities, and they think nothing of having 35, 6, 7 in a class. Our community would come unglued at that. In fact, the teachers came unglued at that in 91 too. And I just don't think that we can underestimate the power of that argument, because in Livermore, class size is king. And you've heard Ken Hall say, I'm sure, that you can have small classes and good benefits and good salaries, but only 2 of the 3. And we've always opted by community direction that we have reasonable class sizes. And of course, the other parts of the things that we've selected before were the opportunities that were provided by the electives, which also puts funding into hiring, offering 1 or 2 sections here and there, which gives an opportunity for some of the, what shall we call them, electives, visual performing arts and those specialty classes. And I think we can clearly make the voters understand that without the parcel tax, we just won't have some of those things.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Look at all the information that you're presenting here this evening. It's just, this may happen, it may not happen, and we may have to go down another road to accomplish what we would like to do and should do for the district and for the parents of this district. And to ask, am I going to pass on the partial tax or not pass on the partial tax, I think depends on how economics and economies are going at that particular point of time. But you need to look at it with an open heart as to what's going on and where can we work with it, and ask then before we vote. Let's go out and vote.
Thank you, Tom. I want to go back to the methodology also. As a person with a degree in numerical analysis, I gotta say, when I look at the confidence number, I'm surprised. And the reason I'm surprised is, I guess I want to know, how has that number changed over time? If you use that same sample size of 350 10 years ago, what would the confidence number be?
It'd be the same.
And in my experience, in the 10 years, the number of people who would actually answer their phone when contacted has changed a lot.
Yeah, and that's a different, the margin of error on a poll is based on an equation which doesn't get at that issue. It's a separate issue, and it's an important one, right? It's an important one in terms of reliability, and I'll sort of talk about that in a second. But as far as just looking at, we have 350 interviews, if they're drawn on a random sample from your population, even though your population has grown
But
a bit.
it's no longer random when it's the people who will actually choose to answer the phone, and that's my worry.
And hold your thought for a second, and I'll answer that piece. But from a pure sample size perspective, let's just say the fact that your population has grown in this 10-year period of time, population plays such a minor role, right, that if you take 350 interviews, and even if your sample size, your population size has grown up, your margin of error is going to be the same now as it was 10 years ago. The issue of reliability in terms of telephone interviewing is a different question. And your point is, look, people call screen, which they do, right? Not everyone, people migrate over to cell phone numbers. Sometimes the voter file record hasn't been updated with their new information, and therefore when we're calling in, you're having to deal with that in a way that inferential statistics always thinks about reaching in and grabbing colored balls out of a bowl, right, and saying that's how you determine these probabilities. Well, the colored balls can't refuse to answer their phone or not tell you their color. And so this sort of begs the question of, well, why, how come this be reliable? The first thing I would say is that the way we pull our samples, we recognize some of these problems, but we can rely on a lot of the information that's on the voter file to adjust for this to some degree. So for example, when I said 350 selected at random, what we do is we use a process called stratification and clustering. And what that is a fancy word for is we take your likely June voter profile and we break these individuals down by a variety of different demographics: age, gender, partisanship, Household party type, that's actually a really important one, right? If I knew you were a Democrat, that tells me something about you. If I know you live with another Democrat, that actually tells me a lot more about you. I'm not saying you're Democrat or Republican, but I'm just giving you an example. Because what happens are Democrats and Democrats sit across the table from one another at dinner, and they talk about politics, and they reinforce each other's political views and that they're right, right? Republicans do the same thing. Republicans live with Republicans, reinforce each other's political indications. If you live in a mixed household, God help you, right? Or live by yourself, you tend to be more moderate. So we pay attention to all of these things: household party type, age, gender, partisanship, etc. And then we develop all of these profiles for your community, such that if I know that 5% of the likely June voters in Livermore Valley Joint Unified School District are Democratic females who live with another Democrat, who are also between the ages of 50 and 65, I can make sure that 5% of the clusters in my sample represent that profile. We do that for the entire district, and then what happens is you randomly pick people into their appropriate clusters, so that when I call somebody and they don't answer their phone, right, or they refuse to take the poll, I can replace them with someone who shares their exact same profile. And it's that what allows us to be so accurate, because it's not that they just call screen or don't call screen as much as it is the profile that they have as politically and demographically that really drives their voting behavior. So is it perfect? Is it what statistics tells us we should be able to do? No, it never has been. But the proof in the end is in how accurate we are, right? And our polling is, even though a lot can happen between polling day and election day, our polling is, with very few exceptions, within 3% of what actually occurs on election day in terms of the vote, when we get to pair up with Larry in terms of him doing his work as well. Because an important part of making what's in your poll actually happen on election day is the process that happens from here on out, and that's what Larry manages.
I thank you for your answer, and I'm gonna ask it again in a different way.
Sure.
I did understand what you said, and I get it. The first thing I would take off this slide is at random, because what you told me was that it was a construct rather than at random, that it's random within categories.
Then that's called stratified samples are random within certain.
Right.
It's actually improvements on a simple random sample.
My biggest concern would be that the people that are most likely to answer the phone and actually talk to you are going to skew significantly older than the people who refuse. Without seeing the data, that would be my guess.
And you're right. If we just called numbers at random, that's what would happen. Except that, as I mentioned, we have 5% of we have clusters that represent certain profiles.
Right.
And so once that profile has been satisfied with an interview, that cluster, it's the next cluster. And so if we just took random numbers, you are correct, we would not have a sample that would necessarily, and we took whoever came to the phone, we wouldn't have a true representative sample of your electorate. But that's not what we do. That's why we stratify and cluster.
Okay, thank you.
And I think we actually have some background information on not the actual names of people, but those profiles of who actually responded and all of that. And we can give that in a Friday packet too, just to kind of give you more assurances, because I think all of us probably, had that same concern about who actually participates.
Yeah, that's something we pay close attention to in terms of as not only we have that process ahead of time, and that's the neat thing about working with the voter files, we can structure this ahead of time, that we know on the backside we're going to have a sample that's within certain tolerances of what your likely June 2014 universe looks like in terms of household party type and age and gender and all of those things. And so that's the neat thing about working with voter files, whereas there's other types of surveys that are out there where random digit dial, for example, where they're choosing phone numbers at random. That's a very haphazard exercise in terms of sampling, because it runs into all those problems you mentioned and you have no way to sort of deal with it.
Right. So to put it in kind of plain language for people without a degree in math, in order to get the number of young respondents that you need in order to be relevant, you might call more of the young people than the older people, because fewer of them are going to answer.
Yes, and certain demographics are easier to get on the phone than others. And so once we've satisfied certain profiles for the young voters, we will do more calling to locate them, certainly. We also, as Larry mentioned, we have the issues of cell phones too, right? And we dial both, because if you leave cell phones off, you definitely get an age skew in terms of who you can now reach, right?
Right. And then just when we go back to things that we include, I heard Mrs. White's point, and I'm sure that the information in 1991 is accurate as represented, but I didn't see that in the data that you presented, that class size was an overwhelming issue. I saw that science, engineering, technology, and math was the highest.
Yeah, I think you have what I would call an embarrassment of riches in terms of what we tested in terms of how popular it was. The fact of the matter is everything we tested in terms of how you could fund were popular. The strongest were continuing funding for advanced programs in math, science, engineering, technology. That's something that's changed over time, right? There's been a much more emphasis on STEM in recent years, and people are getting it, that's, you want to have degrees in these disciplines in order to move on and have high-paying, skilled jobs. And so that's really high. Attracting and retaining highly qualified teachers was also one that, from an intensity perspective, tested very high. But everything on this list, including manageable class sizes, had 75% or more voters say that they favor spending the money on that item. And so when I say embarrassment of riches, what I mean by that is, as a district, that gives you some flexibility in what you decide to fund with these monies. And you could probably pick and choose just about anything on that list in combinations, and it's going to be well received.
So I'm going to direct my next question to Larry, if I could. Given that information, and given the information that you told us before that you would not recommend raising the amount, which I agree with, would we want to leave the language the same, or would we want to tailor it based on the results that we have? Would we want to fund the same programs that the community is familiar with that we've been reporting on, or do we make a change to the higher polling items?
I just want to say that when you said you were going to ask me, Tim took a sigh of relief. I just want you to know. But in answer to your question, I think one of the things we're seeing in this poll, if you look at just from the broadest perspective, voters get it. You've got a great school district. You're doing good things. They want to keep it the way. They like what you're doing, and they want to keep it the way it is. They like the programs you're funding. I think we might make some tweaks in the languages. I mean, basically, it's board decision of what you want to fund, what you want to use this money for. I mean, I've always said, and I've said it to this board, is that when you look at any sort of tax measure, the most important thing we do is making sure we're clear on how the money is going to be spent, so that we can be totally transparent with voters, we can be totally honest with them in terms of how you are spending their money. So if there are some tweaks, it's not to the program of how you're spending the money, although I think if you look at how you spent the money and what voters, how they want their money spent, there is a beautiful match. We may want to tweak it a little bit. I don't think we want to change the ballot language tremendously. I think most districts, candidly, with these numbers, would be pushing the tax rate up dramatically. That's not how you all have operated as a board. I think that has served you well in the past. And in fact, it's one of the reasons I think we like working here, because there is kind of a long-term vision of what you want to do and not get way ahead of the voters. So I think we can play with the language. Just in terms of timing, just so you know, is that we have to have the ballot language, the ballot statement, the ballot language done by let's say the first week of March. So we are in a compressed time frame to write the ballot statement, to write the resolution. We're ready to do that. But this is not a long time frame for a June election. There's a lot of decisions that have to be made fairly quickly.
And when we're talking about time frame, could you address the length of the partial tax and your thoughts on that?
Well, it's 5 years is what you have had historically. I don't think if you made it 7 years because of what reasons, you could probably do that. If 5 years is appropriate to have this board or future board revisit it in 5 years. I think either one is appropriate. I know there are other issues the board may want to deal with in the future, so I think being thoughtful and maybe even conservative is probably the way to go. But as I say, we rarely see poll results like this. It's really a pleasure to see it, and it's a real tribute to the teachers, the administration, you as a board, the students, and the parents,
the community,
and the community that makes this happen. I mean, it is quite rare.
Anyone want to? Yes, Mrs.
I just wanted to comment that my historical remarks had to do with the immediacy of the voters in those times who had suffered those losses.
Correct.
So they polled high with hot button issues about counselors and big classes and science program.
You know, if you look at the history of parcel taxes generally, when parcel taxes first were established, most districts were trying to do something new with it. I mean, they were trying to do, let's say, fund a science program that they didn't have, or fund counselors that they didn't have. What's happened over the last 2 decades is that because of the cutbacks in the state on a variety of measures, parcel taxes has been used to kind of backfill and to do things just that you probably should basically do. This district has always chosen to do some extraordinary things with your modest parcel tax funds, and I think that that's been a good thing. But it's a little different. So, and the first parcel tax is always the biggest challenge for any school district. Subsequent parcel taxes, voters get, as long as districts do a good job spending the money, they become much more accepting of that, and they're not so fearful of it.
And I saw that the superintendent wanted to weigh in.
So one of the other things that's unique from the polling results was that I thought was unique, I don't know, I don't have a wide range of comparison, was how many people vote by mail. And so that also gives us a compressed timeline so far as outreach.
Well, it's not the poll that gives us that information.
It's
the voter file, and we're looking at in this. Although your poll reflects that and who they polled, but it's extraordinary. I mean, we're into the 60%. So 6 out of every 10 people are not choosing to vote by mail. Now that doesn't mean they vote a month early, but they just choose to send in their ballot by mail as opposed to voting in person, and that's a major change that we've seen in the last.
And then one of the other
years.
things I just wanted to put into your thinking process, even if the language is very similar, one difference that has kind of been suggested to me through some of my interactions with parents is the idea that we do have other public schools that are not affiliated with the district. They're part of the charter schools. And so that this has never reached out to them and included them in a way. Some of the families that I've spoken to have personally approached me saying they have students in both systems and would be very eager to combine forces to share if there was a kind of pro rata portion. I think 9%, 8% of the students, 9% of the students, a portion of the funds, and that possibly that would be another way of having the entire community and all of the local schools supported, local public schools. So just something to think about, as that might be a difference in something that we hadn't done before. But I think we've made a lot of inroads and are kind of a different place in that way as well.
But no polling data on that question.
There was, I think there really was, not on that particular question. It wasn't.
We asked a question. We asked a question about whether they would support spending some of the parcel tax proceeds without an amount tied to that on charter schools, and it was about a 50-50 split. About 50 people supported it, 50% did not. I think there's a lot of confusion about what a charter school even is among a lot of voters. Those weren't around when many voters were in school themselves, and so not that that's the overriding factor in which you would make this decision. It's probably a decision that has other issues that sort of circle around it, but it's about a 50-50 split.
That's a pretty dramatic number, though. If one negative voter cancels out 2 positives, and we only have 50% support for adding that, that's a surprise to me. I mean, I think back when the charter school initially formed, there was a lot of discontent. I'm going to measure my words carefully in the community about that function, but I thought we've done a lot of healing since then. But that number doesn't sound like it.
Well, I mean,
The question, actually, though, it wasn't, would you support it if charter schools were included? That wasn't the question.
no, this question is, would you support spending
It's
some
just,
of the
do you
money
think some of the
on?
money could go to them? So it doesn't mean they would vote no on it if they were included. It's just, was that a strong, was that a really high importance, or was it not very high for them? So it would be one of the things. It wasn't. So I think a different question would have had to been asked to arrive at what you're saying is, if they're included, would you absolutely vote no? And that was not the polling question. It was just a little more about, would you strongly support including them or not? And so around half, I think it was.
Right.
So, and then there were still quite a few people who said they don't know.
I think
Maybe
it's one of
you
those,
could get us the specific wording and data on that particular question, because I think that's going to be likely the most difficult question that we face on this. I think,
Right.
the timing, it seems very clear. I think a 7-year length sounds really good to me. I mean, we've had 5-year in the past. We're not asking for an increase. So a little bit more time in between having to raise money and redo this effort, I think would be a relief to everyone involved. Some stability in expected funding is really nice thing for us. But that question, I think, is going to be a
Certainly.
little more difficult to figure out.
we can get you that.
Is there anyone else who'd like to comment on this issue? If not, well, thank you, and we're going to move on
Thank you.
Thank you.
to the transitional kindergarten report.
Thank you. So I'll ask Mrs. Amy Robbins, our Director of Curriculum, to come forward, and she's going to provide you with an update and informational report on our transitional kindergarten program. And I think some expansion of that program.
Good evening, President Runyon, Superintendent Bowers, Board of Trustees. Tonight, I bring you an informational report on our transitional kindergarten, some of our highlights, history, and where we're going with the program. So it's nice to hear that STEM continues to be a reoccurring theme and importance to our community. So we have a transitional kindergarten focused around STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, really designed to promote early learning and get our students engaged at a young age to prepare them for success in kindergarten and throughout high school. Like all of our programs in the district, our TK program is centered around standards. It incorporates the preschool learning standards as well as the Common Core standards, and everything they do within the program is aligned with our district's mission, as well as our focus areas of the 21st century skills such as collaboration, communication, critical thinking, and creativity. And any of you who have been around 5-year-olds know how creative and how much they like to communicate, so it is a great day to observe a TK classroom. So even our youngest students are engaged in 21st century skills early on. So what brought about transitional kindergarten? The Kindergarten Readiness Act of 2010 changed the readiness date for kindergarten. Therefore, it's a 3-year transition to move the date back out. So for our pilot year, which was last year, students whose birthdays fell between November 2nd and December 2nd were able to enroll in our kindergarten program. For this year, it expanded to students whose birthdays lie between October 2nd and December 2nd. And next year, as you can see on the slide, it's pushing it back. So students whose birthdays fall between September 2nd and December 2nd will be enrolling in our TK program or have the opportunity to enroll in our transitional kindergarten. So with that, we are expecting more students for next year. The program started, as mentioned, in 2012-13, our pilot year at the 4 sites, Altamont Creek, Jackson Avenue, Maryland Avenue, and Joe Mitchell K-8. With the moving back of the birth dates for kindergarten, we were able to expand our program this year to include Rancho, Las Positas, and Arroyo Seco. So students across the districts are sent to their closest school to engage in transitional kindergarten. We have very cleverly, and I will give Kim Ferrand, teacher on special assignment, who oversaw and started the program, named our transitional kindergarten Sprouts, early learning. So we're really fertilizing and growing young learners. So students participating in readiness opportunities using themes in science. And that's an acronym that I quite frequently have to look up. But you can see students in the picture even engaging in problem solving and critical thinking, really building those spatial skills. Our program is taught by credentialed teachers, so we have 6 credentialed teachers, and each classroom has an instructional aide. And those teachers meet regularly to collaborate around lesson planning, discussing strategies that are effective and promote early learning. And Carla Estrada, who is now a teacher on special assignment in the curriculum department, meets with our TK teachers, as well as Scott Vernoy, on a regular basis to support as we continue to build and expand our program. So before I talk about the activities and the academics that are occurring, we are very excited that our Livermore Rotarian Foundation several months back donated funds for science, or elementary science specifically, and so we are excited to be in the process of purchasing and rolling out iPads, 4 iPads per TK classroom, to really uphold the technology component and to add a little easy technology and exploration of technology in the classrooms. So looking at our academics, our students are consistently predicting, asking questions, and toddlers, young adults love questions, and engaging with texts. We use curriculum that's focused around the Lawrence Hall of Science themes of the Great Exploration in Mathematics and Science curriculum for young learners. Teachers utilize read-aloud materials to link the GEMS curriculum, enabling teachers to develop vocabulary, reinforcing literacy concepts, and increasing content knowledge. Also, Handwriting Without Tears and Zoophonics are 2 other programs that are utilized in our transitional kindergarten program. There is strong focus on phonemic awareness, phonics skills, letter recognition, letter sound patterns, appropriate letter formation, and writing skills. And also, our students are building their foundational math skills with a program called Math Their Way, and they're using it to explore patterns, number sense concepts, geometry, and measurement. All of those programs, as well as the instruction, are really hands-on, so students are constantly engaging in self-discovery and learning how to work together. So when we look at our programs, it's important to focus on the academic component, but also to focus on the social emotional development, especially for our young learners. And so many of our students are adjusting to working with partners, working as teams, problem solving together, taking turns. Just the structures around every day at an elementary school can be a challenge for some. So really having those personal interactions to allow them to create relationships and to start on a path of success as they move forward. So when you ask students, as well as teachers and parents, you will get an unbelievable amount of voicing of love for the program. And so one of the students said to their teacher, "I love coming here. We've been here for 100 days. That's awesome." So it's exciting to see students who want to be in school, and through play and through exploring lessons, they're able to see that learning is fun and they make connections, and they're eager to come to school every day. So when we look at our programs, last year was our pilot year again. This year we've expanded the program. We now house it at 6 sites. For next year, since the entrance date for kindergarten has moved back even further, we anticipate per students enrolling that we will be able to expand the program, or we'll be expanding the program to house those students. So there's a possibility of expansion for 1 to 2 sites. Again, that would be based on, or 2 to 3, based on student need and interest. So if you haven't marked your calendar, we are encouraging any parents with transitional aid kindergarten students or kindergarten students to attend the TK and kindergarten fair at the Robert Livermore Community Center. It's coming up next week on February 27th from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. and February 28th from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. to register our young learners. And again, this is a program that we have had a lot of success with. We have other school districts that have visited our program to see how we got our transitional kindergarten program started and off the ground and running. And so it definitely is a wonderful opportunity for all learners. And so we look forward to watching it flourish and interacting with those students and following those students as they leave transitional kindergarten. That concludes my reports. If you have any questions or comments, I'm happy to take those.
All right. Do we have any questions from the public? from the board? Comments, anybody? Well, I've got a comment. You know, I think sometimes in education, everything that's old is new again. And this sounds an awful lot like what kindergarten used to be. Am I wrong in thinking that?
I don't know what kindergarten used to be. I don't remember back that far. But some things are cyclical, and so this is infusing a little bit of everything into meeting the needs of our students.
It just seems like kindergarten used to be about getting along with your neighbor, getting adjusted to a school environment, a lot of those soft skills that you talked about, as well as the academic, learning your numbers and your letters and your colors and your shapes. And instead we decided that everyone needed to read in kindergarten and do math in kindergarten and do book reports in kindergarten. And now instead we've moved kindergarten to a younger age and back to what it used to be. And so I guess I'm happy for the development of TK. I just wonder if children have changed that much, that it's developmentally appropriate to keep pushing standards down on kids.
And I think where we look at California and other states as far as the entrance date for kindergarten, we had an entrance date that was pretty early in comparison to other states. So.
And we had it early, and we pushed those academic requirements down on them in addition. So it's just interesting to me, and I think that we have a really good quality program, and I'm really glad to see it, but it is interesting that these waves come through education, and this seems to be another one saying, hey, look, before we demand academics, we need to demand some of these soft skills. We need to provide students with the opportunities to learn these soft skills that are really important to success later on.
Well, and I'm hoping that with the Common Core, it's resurfaces soft skills need to be present at every grade level. I mean, if we want students to be creative and collaborative and communicating and thinking critically, they're going to be interacting with one another. So it resurfaces across the grade levels, as far as I'm concerned.
All right. Well, if no one, Mrs. White.
I just, is there any thought from the legislation perspective that we're going to stop at having 4 months? Let's see, September, October, only 3 months of the year students get transitional kindergarten. I mean, what's magic about not letting the students who are 4 years old after the 1st of December from coming? I mean, there's got to be arbitrary someplace.
I think that was a guide by looking at other states as far as to move it back, but also I know there's talk in legislation about looking at early interventions or early learning across the state.
Topic. Thank you.
So that would be pre-KK?
Pre-K.
We're not going to jump there yet, but we will definitely meet the needs.
That takes us to our discussion action items, and would you like to present item A?
So thank you, Madam President. This is once again Mr. Chris Van Schack, and I believe he has back-to-back items A and B, so we'll do a one-time introduction.
Thank you for the one-time introduction. In a manner similar to the one from earlier in the evening when I introduced to you the negotiated items with LEA, tonight is actually the second part of the process with CSEA, which is another one of our employee associations. And at the last board meeting, I did present you guys with their initial items. And so this evening, I will go through that process one time again. And again, just a reminder, we have skipped down to step 3. And so tonight, we will be asking you to receive their items and adopt ours. And just as a reminder from last meeting, their items were, they had this list: workday and break in service and leaves, evaluations, pay and allowance, classification and reclassification, professional growth, and duration. Once again, you were given these items at the last meeting. We had an opportunity for the public to weigh in, and tonight I will ask you to give the public another opportunity to weigh in, and after that we will accept their items, accept their initial proposal, and move forward with negotiation.
All right, since we seem to have lost our audience other than staff members, I think we'll offer for anyone to come forward, but I'm thinking no one will. And does anyone from the board want to comment? And otherwise, I'll entertain a motion.
I move that we'll adopt the discussion action item A, without getting wordy on it.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. And we have a motion and a second, and if the clerk could call the roll, because there's been a change in law, and we're going to do roll call votes on everything.
Dr. Dunlop? Myself, aye. President Runyon?
Aye.
White?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin? Allie?
Haley.
Aye.
Haley, I'm sorry. Right,
Sarah.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, the motion passes unanimously, and that moves us to item B.
Okay, with that accepted, I will present you once again with the district initial proposal. Again, the items are there before you. This is the second time you've seen it. The last meeting, we gave the public an opportunity to weigh in. I think their response was similar to that which we've seen tonight. And so I will ask Madam President to once again open the floor to public comments and then move forward with an adoption.
All right, so here we go again. Would anyone like to comment from the public or the board? All right, I'll entertain a motion.
I move that we adopt the district's initial proposal for the successor agreement between the district and CSEA.
All right, and we have a motion and a second by Mr. McLaughlin. Was there a question?
Well, the question is that we adopted first, and now one of them has to be received. We don't adopt, and so my understanding is
Right.
the way it's been phrased is you're adopting both, and so we need to clarify for the record that we don't adopt
we're receiving.
there.
We don't adopt.
We adopt our own, and we
adopt our
receive
own.
theirs formally.
Correct.
So I just want to make sure for the record that you voted on the accurate
Well, this
language.
one's the one that we adopt, so do you want us to go back on item A?
Oh, the agenda says,
Oh, they are.
Oh, they're backwards.
They are back.
Okay, all right, sorry.
Now we'll do receive.
That's fine.
so what do we need to do?
So now we need to receive the initial proposal. So it's wrong, what's up on the screen is the bottom line. So we need to receive the initial proposal. So if Dr. Dunlap will make your motion again,
So this is the wrong listing. So
under item B,
this is B,
receive the initial proposal.
and so we will receive the initial proposal from the CSEA or the successor agreement.
And Mr. McLaughlin, would you like to second that again? Mr. McLaughlin, did you want to second that? All right, thank you. So now we have a motion and a second, if we could call the roll.
Yes. Haley?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin? Mrs. White?
Aye.
Dr. Dunlop?
Aye.
Myself, aye. And President Runyon?
Aye. So the motion passes unanimously, and that brings us to Resolution 25.
So with this item, Madam President, we'll ask Mr. Chris Van Schack, Assistant Superintendent of Administrative Services, to present to the board a resolution for your approval. And this has to do with the relative order of termination for employees in the event of any layoff for certificated employees.
Thank you once again, Mrs. Bowers. I promise this one will be less confusing. Unfortunately, this time of the year, we have to discuss the possibility that there may be layoffs, and even though we're optimistic that that will not be the case, we need to move forward with the possibility that it would be. And so in moving forward, thank you. The timeline is that this evening we take a look at tie-breaking criteria. On March the 4th, we'd bring forward any potential layoffs, and it's referred to here as particular kinds of service, which indicates if there are areas that we would need to lay off. We identify those March 4th. The precautionary notices are sent out March 15th, and then we have hearings if there are appeals in April, and then final notification for employees who are to be laid off would be in May. And again, this is for certificated employees. The procedures we went through to create this tie-breaking list is we did develop a comprehensive seniority list. We verified all credential information of the teachers that we have. We distributed the list. This evening we're going to, or in the next meeting, the board would determine which services would be reduced if we needed to do so, and we would review employee status and move forward with that. The tie-breaking criteria, once again, this is for employees who have identical seniority dates. And so if we go through the layoff process and we have multiple employees who we need to consider for layoff, the first criteria is seniority date. And so the least senior receives a layoff notice. In those cases where they have identical seniority dates, we go through a tie-breaking criteria, and it's listed here as 4 categories, and we give points for each of these categories. And so that allows us to separate out some of our employees with, again, those identical seniority dates. And so this evening, we're asking you to take a look at the criteria that we've established, which has to do with English language certification, additional experience outside of the district, professional preparation, so additional courses that they've taken, and then if none of those allowed us to break the tie, we go to a lottery. And so once again, we ask you to move forward with the acceptance of these criteria for tie-breaking situations in which, again, employees had identical seniority dates.
Would any member like to comment?
Yep. A couple of items. One, just for clarification, we don't really anticipate layoffs this year, I assume?
No, we don't. At this point, we don't anticipate that we'll have to lay off employees. We have enough retirements. We think that even if we were to reduce staffing slightly, we'd still be okay. But again, as a cautionary measure, we need to adopt these tie-breaking criteria in the event that something happens. And again, the state budget is always a mystery. But if something happened and we were to have to reduce staffing, this is what we'd have to go with.
And second question, are there any differences in this particular tie-breaking criteria than we did last year?
No, the criteria has been the same for 4 years now. And again, putting some sort of emphasis on our English language certification, because we do, that is a high needs area. And once again, these are the categories we established 4 years ago, and we've gone with the same categories each of these years.
Good, thank you.
Could you briefly give us the how the lottery works? The coin flip? What are you doing for the lottery?
We actually put names on slips of paper, and we put them into a bowl, and we pull names out.
Who pulls?
Who pulls the names? Probably me. We've never got to that point, but
Just curious. I'm just curious.
I guess that would be quite an honor.
Anything like that? Huh?
Are you volunteering, Mr. Rogie? Yeah.
No, thank you.
Anyone else? All right, so I'll entertain a motion on this item.
I'll move item C, resolution number 2513/14, specify the criteria to be used to determine the order of termination of certificate employees by equal seniority tiebreaker.
I'll second it.
All right, if the clerk will call the roll.
Ms. McLaughlin? Mrs. White?
Aye.
Dr. Dunlop?
Aye.
Self, aye. President Runyon?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
And Haley?
Aye.
The motion carries unanimously. And that takes us to item D.
Well, thank you, Madam President. The board is being asked to vote for no more than 4 candidates to serve as California School Board Association delegate members for a 2-year term. In the past, Trustee White has served in that capacity, but in her new role as director, I don't think she...
I don't get to vote.
I
don't get to serve.
She doesn't get to do both.
There's a
duties.
vacant spot on the list.
Okay, so there's a vacant spot, and so perhaps one of you would like to make a recommendation. I know that the biographies were provided to you in advance.
Could I just make?
I would make a recommendation, and that is that we vote both for our good colleague from the Dublin School District and from the Pleasanton School District. That would be Amy and what?
Well, there were 3
Amy,
from Pleasanton.
Well,
okay, Mrs. White.
that's hard to say. I mean, there was chatter at the Al Costa breakfast, which suggested that the Pleasanton folks ought to fight it out among themselves. You know, how dare they nominate 3? But
Okay.
I don't think three have a chance at all of being successful. And, you know, part of me wants to just stay out of it.
Yeah, I'd like to stay out of the internal politics of another board myself, but I think we're familiar with Miss or Mrs. Miller from ROP, and I believe she's been helpful in getting some of the changes implemented in the last year. Is that correct?
That's correct. That she's been very helpful.
So
Jamie, it's also been on the ROP board, and both of them done, in my estimation, a really good job and good service to our students.
Yeah.
So that's why I prefer them.
Jamie was appointed. There was a vacancy and Jamie was appointed. Valerie was elected at one point. There was a vacancy and Jamie was appointed. And you'll notice that Jamie does PTA activities, and she's also part of, is it Healthy Kids Alameda County, something like that.
Right.
Okay.
Nancy Thomas, who is the other candidate, was an unsuccessful candidate in the last election and would like to return to the delegate assembly. She's been on the committee for CIF, for CSBA.
So we have five candidates before opening. And we're saying we're not going to place all four, or I'm getting the feeling that we're not going to vote for four.
I think it's kind of like a local election. The fewer you pick, the more weight your vote has. And so the question is, do we throw all our votes to one person, two people, three people, or four people? And, you know, that's a determination for this board to make. And so your thoughts?
Well, my thought was to go with Ms. Thomas, Ms. Miller, and Jamie Hinsky. I got part of the copy wrong. And that was my thought on that, because you're right, there's three from Pleasanton, and Bowser is running for superintendent
Of Alameda County.
Yeah.
Which is...
Didn't disqualify him, but on the other hand...
It seems an unusual
yeah.
thing to ask for, to be appointed to school boards association if you're running for superintendent. So it sounds like we have some consensus along Mrs. Miller and Hinsky.
The historic Dunlop rule was to vote for the one you nominated.
Well, the issue is you only vote for the ones you really want.
Yeah.
And so you just don't pick four because there's four to pick,
No.
you know.
Yeah,
we made,
I'm just trying to...
We made that mistake a few years ago, and Ann almost paid the price.
Had a runoff.
I'm trying to get to the point of somebody making a resolution to see if we can get support of a majority here. So 1, 2, or 3 individuals have been talked about, so would someone care to make a motion? All right. Then I'm going to do this. Let's make a motion on individuals, and we'll see how we go. I'll make a motion that we vote for Ms. Miller.
Dr. Longfellow.
No.
No, I just
Declined, like everybody else.
Sorry, I misunderstood.
I'm just trying to move
Okay.
on, and
Okay.
and if no one else is going to make a motion, I'm going to make a motion for Ms. Miller.
And what you propose is we take them individually and see. And I would second that motion.
Okay, so all those in favor of voting yes for Ms. Miller?
Yes.
Do we have to do roll call on each one of them?
Well, I don't think this is legal, but we might as well. Go ahead.
I don't think
This is for...
I don't think,
This is for
This
Amy
is
Miller.
I would abstain if I were you.
This
You
is-
make no friends here.
Yeah. This is for Amy Miller. Motion is for Amy Miller, and roll call vote is for Mr. McLaughlin. Aye or no? Aye. Mrs. White?
Aye.
Dr. Dunlop?
Aye.
Myself, aye. President Runyon?
Aye. Now, that passed unanimously. The question is, does anyone want to make a motion on another candidate?
I would make a motion for Jamie Henke.
And I would second.
All right, and so if, go ahead and call the vote.
Did we not want their vote?
No,
Or
I told him to
abstention.
stay out of it because abstain.
They can abstain. You both want to abstain? Okay, we'll record it.
Make no friends. Exactly.
All right, so now we are voting for Jamie Henske and Mr. McLaughlin. Aye or nay?
Abstain.
Abstain? Okay. Mrs. White?
Aye.
Dr. Dunlop?
Aye.
Myself, aye. President Runyon?
Aye.
We have one abstention and 4 aye. And 3 abstentions, excuse me.
Yeah.
And 4 aye. Oh, this is Eddie.
All right. Is there a motion on another person? Then I think we're done. That's good enough.
We vote on that?
No, I think we're good. If no one else wanted
Okay.
to make another motion, I think that's sufficient.
Artfully done, Mrs. Harnian.
Thank you. Sometimes you just want to get out of the question. All right, that gets us to consent items, and we have items A through I. Did anyone want to pull one for any further discussion? If everyone's content, I'll entertain a motion. You'll move the consent items, Mr. McLaughlin? Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. And if the clerk will call the roll?
Mr. McLaughlin? Mrs. White?
Aye.
Dr. Dunlop?
Aye.
Myself, aye. President Runyon?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
And Haley?
Aye.
So the consent items pass unanimously. We have a resolution, and maybe the superintendent would like to tell us a little bit more about this Bright Schools program.
Certainly. So one of the things that one of the very important focus areas of our Energy Conservation Committee is to apply for different kinds of grants to support their goals in making sure that we are a green district and that we conserve our resources. And so what we're asking for is a resolution that would approve us to submit an application for the Bright Schools program, technical assistance, which would help us receive a grant of $20,000 toward that very, very good purpose.
Sounds wonderful.
I move that we accept the resolution 2613/4.
I'll second it.
And if the clerk will call the roll?
Haley?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
President Runyon?
Aye.
Myself, aye. Dr. Dunlop?
Aye.
Mrs. White?
Aye.
And Mr. McLaughlin?
I love the way you're keeping us all on our toes.
Bet. Change it up.
All right, board member reports and requests. Maybe we'll start over here with Mr. McLaughlin and come to Mrs. White next. All right, you going to pass?
I would like to comment on the LEA breakfast that I was able to attend. It was the Al Costa, which is Alameda and Contra Costa County teacher organizations, CTA organizations, and it was different this year. We didn't have to drive to Walnut Creek to go. It was good to see Dr. Dunlop sneak in for a few minutes. I'm sorry you missed breakfast. It was good breakfast. And I remember several years ago at a similar breakfast, the speaker up at the platform said, well, the grass is going to be green and the flag is going to be up, but it isn't going to be school because we were in such hard times. And all I could think was this year, the grass is not going to be green. The flag probably will be up, and it'll be more like school than ever before in the last few years. So it was a good time, and I hope you all can come next year. The Graduations Requirement Committee met. This is the Superintendent's Committee, and Mr. Rogi is on it now. We've been playing around with the units that are required and think they might consider raising them, but we need some data to find out how many students are just at the limit. Also considering playing around with the math requirements and perhaps including world languages in some of the requirements. I also went to the Del Val Fine Arts concert on Saturday night at the Banquet. They had the Euclid Quartet played, which is a string quartet. And Del Val Fine Arts this year had brought them in the day before. So they spent Valentine's Day visiting our middle schools, Christensen East and Livermore High. and they were impressed with the attentiveness of our students and the eagerness with which they paid attention. And as the speaker said, it's the only standing ovation from middle school students I've ever had. So it must have been a very productive thing, and we want to thank the quartet for coming from Cleveland on Valentine's Day. Their significant others apparently had some concerns about that. And we want to thank Del Valle Fine Arts for supporting this project.
Thank you, Mrs. White. Mr. Rogi?
Yes, I attended the Livermore Expo. Also was very impressed with the all the displays and the excitement and the student involvement. Great to see. I would. Also, that same week, I attended the SELPA Parents Night meeting for that was here at the district office, where special ed parents come together to get information on the programs and various other things. Very crowded room, was very well attended. I appreciated seeing that. And also, I attended the Mendenhall night for the history and saw some really great displays. I know some parents must be engineers because there were some really, really good displays, but the writing and the history notes on these boards were excellent. I was fascinated. I spent all night there reliving my history. But it was a great night, and everybody was excited and well attended, and parents were also impressed with their going on. That's me.
Dr. Dunlop.
Well, I did get to go to the breakfast for a little while. I did actually miss the breakfast because I went to substitute for Mr. Rogi, who was not available for science on Saturday. But it was, again, a fascinating presentation, and they filled the auditorium, basically the Bankhead Theater, twice. So good turnout, even though it was one of the few rainy days we've had this year. So it was really impressive to see that they had that kind of turnout. And I noticed the Lawrence Livermore Laboratory person on that is speaking to Las Positas College. So, you know, he did a very good job, and he probably deserves a chance to visit Las Positas as well. The Math Counts regional competition is this Saturday, so I think all the Mendenhall kids were there having one of their practice sessions rather than coming here, because they're really serious about Math Counts, and so they were off apparently doing that this evening. But that competition will be the regional one, very difficult, and they have people from all over the East Bay who participate in that, very competitive. And with that, I'll turn the time over to someone else.
Well, I thank Mrs. White for a comment about the green grass, because that triggered something in me, that responsibility that I think we have to the community is maybe to look at our water consumption and what we can do in this time of drought to cut back. I know my in-laws live on a hobby farm in Oregon on well water, and during the summer they don't water their grass at all, and they don't mow their grass, and when it starts raining again, then the grass grows back, even though it turned completely brown. I hope that the drought doesn't get so severe where we have to consider that, but I think it'd be prudent to start drawing up a list and prioritizing where we might be able to save some water for the community as needed. So thank you for that comment. Mrs. White and I attended a couple of meetings last week parcel tax information meeting for community members interested in working on the parcel tax endeavor, and the PCIC meeting of the heads of the various parent groups in our schools. And they had a wonderful presentation by the high school principals about what's coming in high school and what's of interest to parents in other grade levels. And then I was in attendance at a Rotary mini grants meeting, and I think this is just kind of indicative of the community support that the schools have in Livermore, that Rotary joins with the Livermore Valley Education Foundation on many of the grants that they grant, and they're actually matched by the Education Foundation when Rotary decides to give a mini grant to a purpose to which LVF can match. And that's what I really love about living in Livermore, is the community pulls together on things and finds a way to get it done. And along those lines, I was contacted by a business member in the community looking for a way to target some funds for donation, and had a conversation with the principal over at Junction about some needs that he might have that they could be paired up. So if you're a business owner or someone who'd like to target a donation, we would love to talk with you. Any of the people sitting at this dais would love to talk with you about a donation, and we will help you find a cause in which you can believe. And there's nothing more fun than hooking up people that want to contribute to the schools with some places where we have definite needs. And on that, I'll turn it over to the superintendent.
Thank you. So just to follow up, one of the things that we have received from the state is a reminder about the drought conditions and asking each district to review what they're doing and asking for at least a 10% reduction. But what we have asked Mr. Nagel to do is to follow that up with not only an action plan, but also some public information about what we're doing and how others can support us in our efforts. So that'll be coming, and so I think we're on the same wavelength with that. So a couple of things quite a few things have happened, but I'll just highlight a few. I had the absolute pleasure in this boardroom of serving as the mistress of ceremonies at our 2 district-wide spelling bees, grades 4 to 6 and grades 7 to 8. And it was just really exciting to witness the very high level of participation and skill. There were so many family members, staff members in support of the champion spellers. They just filled the room. And we will be sending at least 3, if not 4, on to the county spelling bees. And I think that the other districts better watch out because they were very competitive. I wanted to also mention, you were talking about the support from groups like Rotary with the mini grants. Rotary is also, they've contacted us and they want to reinitiate a vocational kind of career technical education scholarship. So they had that in the past. They had not been doing it the last few years. So they're revising that. And so part of it was because they had seen and heard so much about the college career readiness programs like the Culinary Academy, and thinking that not every student is going right from high school into the 4-year university. And there are other opportunities for specialized training and certification programs that they wanted to support. So we're looking forward to that application coming out, and we're very excited that Rotary is so responsive. We also held our annual mid-year leadership team workshop here, again in the boardroom, the well-used room, with a focus on student achievement data, results, and how we measure student success and accountability. Because one of the things with the transition to the local control accountability plan is that we must hold ourselves accountable in different ways, and particularly this year without the STAR test and CST results being in every grade level, how do we measure student success and progress, and how do we report on that? And as you mentioned, Trustee Runyon, and both you and Trustee White, we all were here for the Parent Club Information Council meeting. And in addition to the 2 comprehensive high school principal presentations, we had the new city librarian and children's librarian come. And it's really exciting. They have now asked to be, or we've invited them to, and they've accepted to be kind of permanent members of that group, because there's so many times when we can share resources and programs and support each other in educating our community and our students. So I don't have a lot of details yet, but these are some hot off the press items. I was informed that Granada High School has been awarded additional thousands of dollars, approximately $9,000 at first, and it might be a down payment of another $9,000 in Google grant funds. And this is for their progress made toward implementing the current Equal Opportunity Schools grant. So we're very excited about that. And most of the schools that are part of the grant did not receive this. So it was a very exclusive honor because we've done so well. The high school has done so well. Granada has really embraced every facet of it, and if there were barriers, they have worked through them, and so they're seeing a lot of success. We were actually invited to go to Santa Barbara to speak about our success with Google paying for it, which was very tempting, but it was the day of our workshop. So, but again, it was really nice to see that we'd be a state model for that. And on the same lines, Livermore High School has just been informed of a statewide award. It's a statewide Civic Learning Award of Merit. So the official notification will be forthcoming. We have the first word came out today, and it's really a reason to celebrate how outstanding our schools are, not only regionally, but statewide. And this is because of the efforts that they make towards citizenship and community service. I want to remind everybody that this Thursday is the Science Odyssey. So it'll be hosted at Junction K-8 School. We will have hundreds of independent science inquiry projects on display. Students will be presenting their findings. They will be judged by scientists or retired scientists in the community. There will be science demonstrations throughout the campus from community members and students. There will be good food and a scientific jam band. So I hope that you can at least stop by for some time on Thursday. And then I wanted to close by sharing, in honor of President's Day, one of my favorite quotes from Abraham Lincoln. And I'm going to be using it in a session that I'm teaching this Saturday at the Access Superintendent's Academy. The topic of the session I was asked to speak on is building a collaborative culture in a challenging socio-political climate. Sound familiar? And so this is the quote from Abraham Lincoln: "A house divided against itself cannot stand." So something to think about as we work through issues, challenges, contentious things that can arise. How do you approach those? How do you not make that the focus? How do you work through things collaboratively on what you do have in common and the values that we share? So those words really ring true, and I believe our strength as a district and the Livermore community is that despite the differences, the viewpoints, the backgrounds and interests, you can hear even the results in the poll. People had varied experiences. Many had nothing to do directly with our schools, but what came through was that the Livermore community, regardless of those differences, they share in common a value for education, for our youth, and for the future. So that was really, I think that's one of the things we pulled for political advice on a parcel tax measure, but I think it was also a really nice opportunity to see how much support there is for the mission that we are all focused on. And I think that's why our local community is strong. That's why we've weathered the fiscal crisis better than most. It wasn't because we had more money, certainly, but because we were unified in our core values that the board established, and we didn't allow the financial crisis to divide and splinter us. And by the same token, some folks that believe as times get better, that is also occasion to divide and splinter. And so our efforts will still be to collaboratively work as a team, and remember, we're united. And I'm really confident that we will get through those challenges as well. And that concludes my report.
Adjourned at 9:12.